On December 10th, 1972, Major League Baseball's American League voted to try the DH to help boost offensive efficiency, as the previous decade was some of the worst offense in baseball history in attempts to save baseball. And little did they know, they would change the game forever. Today we're going to dive into how this rule came to be and how it's affected the league on Daily Sports History. Welcome to Daily Sports History. I'm Ethan Reese, your guide as you daily learn more about sports history, increasing your sports knowledge. And today's trivia question to listen out for throughout the episode is, who was the very first DH in baseball history? Listen to the episode to find out the answer, and if you miss it, we'll give it to you at the very end. So first, what is a designated hitter? A designated hitter in baseball is a player that only plays offense. They only hit. They do not take the field to play defense in any way. Now, a designated hitter does not necessarily need to take the place of the pitcher, but that's normally how it goes, as the pitcher is usually the weakest hitter. Now, more recently with Shohei Ohtani, that may not be the case, but more often that was the case back in the day. As in the 1800s, the difference between a pitcher's batting average and a traditional player's batting average was about 50. So it wasn't a huge gap, but it was starting to grow with every year. And every decade till 1950, that difference continued to grow. And by 1972, the batting average difference between a pitcher and a regular player was over 100, as pitchers had become more specialized in pitching and less in hitting. And the average batting average for a pitcher between 1970 and 1972 was 147, only slightly better than the 1960s when it was 143. Now, previously we covered the rules change where they lowered the mound and changed the strike zone to help increase offense, as throughout the 60s offense was dying and it was slowly getting better, but baseball wanted to continue to improve that because they saw how offenses contributed to better ticket sales, which made the owners more money, made the players more money, and made everyone more money, and that's what everyone liked. And it was a more enjoyable product on the field. But the history of the designated hitter wasn't a novel idea. The first time it was brought up was in 1891, where the American League and the National League each brought their own proposals. Albert Goodwin Spaldwin of the Spaldwin brothers, who was a player himself, brought his own take to showing how pitchers struggled as they were more specialized players. And if a pitcher got injured hitting, it really destroyed the team's defense. So his proposal was to actually have only an 8-man batting order. So the pitcher only pitched, and you got rid of that player in the batting order completely. It's a very simple concept, but it wasn't one that really flew. And his friend Charles Temple actually suggested what is now known as the DH, a player designated to hit and replace, presumably, the pitcher, eliminating him from batting so he can focus on the defensive perspective. Now, they presented both the National League and the American League, and both of them turned this down because they thought that the truest form of the game was that a player played every single position. And if your pitcher was bad at hitting, the other team's pitcher would be bad at hitting, so it kind of equaled it out. It didn't give you an advantage either way, unless you have once-in-a-generational talents like Babe Ruth, and hitter, and Shohei Ohtani, who's a great pitcher and hitter. But they continued to raise this idea. It was brought to the owners in 1906 by Philadelphia manager Connie Mack, and it fizzled out. And again, it was rejected, and it continued to get rejected as salaries went up. It was like, also, well, does a pitcher get paid less? Does the hitter get paid less? How do they pay these players? Because they're only playing half the game. And it just caused more and more confusion. And they continued to kind of grease the wheels a little bit every time. And they took a 4-year trial period for the minor league system to try the designated hitter. And it went to great success. And then 2 years later, they actually allowed the American League to try this in spring training to see if it worked for the players as well. But the National League didn't want any part of it, which is a very unique system in baseball. We'll cover this at some point. But the American League and National League kind of work separately. They're kind of like how states are part of the United States. They have their own legislation and their own laws, but they also are governed by the United States in a whole. That's what baseball is. These two states kind of govern themselves, but are over the baseball umbrella. And after the success of this experiment, at the end of the 1972 season, and it was American League owners voted 8-4 to approve the designated hitter. And the National League again voted to not include it. But they did agree on one aspect. If there was ever interleague play, the team that was home would play by their rules. So if a National League team went to the American League, they could use a designated hitter. But if an American League team went to play in a National League team, they would not be allowed to use a designated hitter. So they started this in 1973 under a 3-year trial. And on April 6, 1973, the very first designated hitter was put into place, and it was Yankees hitter Ron Blumberg. And with that at-bat, he changed baseball forever. And this change actually helped increase batting average, increase scoring, and increase attendance at American League games. And after this 3-year trial, the American League decided to continue this as a more permanent rule, and the National League still voted no. And it wasn't until 2022, very recently, that the National League finally decided to adopt the designated hitter. It's a long time. It really was the major distinction from the National League to the American League. But as teams played more interleague play, it kept happening more and more. It just seemed inevitable that the National League would join the American League. It just made sense. As pitchers became even more specialized to this day, and putting your prize pitcher out there to hit, run bases, and chances at more injury was just something that they couldn't continue doing. Now, over the years, the DH has become a coveted position and has allowed hitters to be just as focused on hitting as pitchers are focused on pitching, and makes the DH position even more valuable. And some of them continue to get paid an amazing amount. And the first designated hitter to be inducted into the Hall of Fame was Harold Baines. But he's been followed by Edgar Martinez, Frank Thomas, and David Ortiz. Now, these are players that played over 50% of their games at DH, with David Ortiz playing the most, with 88% of his games played being at designated hitter. And these are more recent players, and it's going to continue to get even more as the National League has joined. And we just had an MVP who was more of a designated hitter. And it continues to change, and the game has had more success because of it. Offense always leads to more fun and engagement in the game, no matter what sport you're in. And it's a great thing to see baseball continue to push the envelope to get a better product on the field. And it's great to see because games that just stay stagnant tend to be left behind. And baseball is focusing on not being left in the past. And I want to thank you for listening to today's episode. If you want more baseball history content, check out This Week in Baseball History with Mike and Bill, where every week they dive into the history of baseball in unique ways. So if you want even more baseball history, we'll put a link in the description below for you to check them out. And if you enjoyed today's episode, please go tell a friend about all the sports history you're learning, and come back tomorrow for more daily sports history. And did you catch the answer to today's trivia question? Who was the very first designated hitter? The very first designated hitter was Ron Blumberg of the New York Yankees, who was able to use this new DH rule to help extend his career in baseball. And surprisingly, he wasn't known as a power hitter. He was more of a guy that continuously got on base.